the value is just so high that you can't tell people they can't do this.
But on the business side, there's a risk of not adopting fast enough, of not enabling our teams. Minimum viable controls. I mean, all the things I can think of, sadly, many aren't available today for us to do.
Welcome back to Threats, Pitfalls, and Risk Myths, the TPRM Podcast. I'm your host, Nate Lee, and today I'm joined by Jacob DePriest. He's the CISO over at 1Password and the former deputy CISO at GitHub, where he had a front row seat to a global scale problem space. And he was there for the start of the granddaddy of all AI coding tools, GitHub Copilot. He's responsible for security, IT, and working tightly with the product teams at 1Password. That gives him an extremely unique viewpoint from multiple angles that most of us just don't see. In this episode, we'll talk about what security looks like in a world of agent swarms, autonomous tooling, and where AI can build software faster than most teams can even review it. Jacob shares how he thinks about secure design, ephemeral credentials, and what identity and intent really mean when agents are acting on behalf of humans. We'll talk about developer workflows, software supply chain risk, and why the pace of learning required in security has to increase in order to match the pace of AI innovation. Then later in the episode, I want to share something with you that we've been building for the last 9 months to address a problem that's been plaguing me personally for years while running B2B SaaS security teams. This is going to be one of the most grounded conversations I've had about the real-world implications of AI and security, so let's jump in. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Threats, Pitfalls, and Risk Myths, the TPRM podcast. This week, we are joined by Jacob DePriest. He is the CISO over at 1Password, my favorite password manager. But also, you were deputy CISO over at GitHub and then doing developer experience at the NSA, which I can only imagine is a very interesting job that shows things that the rest of us don't normally see. But really excited to have you on. So thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to chatting today.
Right. And I think, what's interesting because you're at a security company, so you have kind of the perspective, like we were talking about earlier, we have the perspective at both sides of the fence. I mean, what's been, when we think about being at a company where you now have a lot of say in the product and you're an actual user and you know the domain really well, and what's been sort of the biggest thing that's been there for you, when you come in like that, opens your eyes and that you're most excited about getting involved with?
Yeah, it's been really fun because I've also been a longtime 1Password user. I think I've been using it personally for 15 years now, back when I was still like syncing it through Dropbox and various other random ways. And so it's been fun being on the inside and getting to hear what our customers are having to say, but also having been a personal customer and a business customer before. And so, there's a bit of we call it internally customer zero, which I think a lot of customers do, or a lot of companies do. But it's fun to be in those product and strategy discussions to understand, and be able to contribute and say like, well, hey, this is typically how a security team would think about where this fits in or how this risk is or how this compares to other risks. And so I think there's a lot of the sort of product strategy conversations that I found just incredibly rewarding. And then there's stuff I didn't really expect too, is like we started talking about things like pricing and packaging and negotiations. And I'm like, well, I'm always sitting on the other side of the table. So always happy to share what works and doesn't work from the buyer side with our teams internally. So that's been fun too.
Great. And so I think you own IT there as well. So you're doing sort of not just security controls, but also out of the implementation of enabling everybody to build and use everything securely.
Exactly. Yeah. Which has been, I've always had like a kind of a strong affinity for the IT teams. Even when I was at NSA, my last gig there was focused on kind of building out the IT platforms for remote work, kind of in the times of COVID. And so it's been a joy to do that here as well. And particularly as we're also, IT is sometimes the buyer of 1Password in our products as well. Mm-hmm. And so it's been fun to kind of see both sides of that.
Yeah, I know you said previously, things about, and we've talked about this, which I think is really interesting and ties in well to kind of owning both IT and security, and that you tend to focus on like business objectives first. And then, looking at what are the risks, instead of, I think a lot of people end up thinking about risk first because they're in security and we're supposed to think about risk. But I really like what you've talked about in the past about looking at the business objectives. How are you enabling that? And then, layering risk on top of that. And then lastly, coming in with controls. And I feel like, that's really kind of the way to do things, but often it's something that is hard for security folks who come in maybe with a more technical background, and they're focusing on controls and how we can enforce this first. How do you see that playing out day to day, when it comes to getting your team aligned with that as kind of a general way of operating?
Yeah, it's I mentally have this vision of whether it's Jiminy Cricket on one shoulder and somebody else on the other shoulder, or like the old cartoons, whether it's some kind of, it's not good versus bad, but it's just two different perspectives, right?
Yep.
One on each shoulder. And I think it's, to be the first person to say AI on the podcast, sorry about that. I think
there'll be lots of AI.
It brings this to the forefront. Like, you have to deal with this in a way that I think certainly every security leader who was leading IT and vice versa has had to deal with in the past years as well. But I think it's just visceral now in a way that it hasn't been. And so I'll give you an example right now. Like many companies, we're looking at AI agentic building platforms, but they're not just for our dev teams. We've been using those for a long time, but really for like every worker, right? Like we want every worker to be
the future is going to be something along those lines.
But a lot of the leading capabilities are startups right now. And so they haven't, often startups don't evolve their security posture quite as fast as their products, which makes sense, right? Product market fit and getting customer traction and all those things.
Yep.
And so we're having to, I'm constantly thinking about and talking with my teams of, there's certainly a security risk from a control perspective or auditability perspective or whatever, pick whatever vendor we're talking to. But on the business side, there's a risk of not adopting fast enough, of not enabling our teams. And that risk may be like an overall risk to how fast we move as a business, but it also could be a risk of, if we don't provide a centralized platform for our employees, then they're more likely to use a personal account on some other thing, or download other software, or go use a different laptop to get something done, where we just then have no visibility and no controls. And so I don't think there's a perfect answer to this. I think it's a judgment call, and it's one we have to continually make. But it's definitely a visceral conversation we have every day.
Yeah, and I think that's, obviously everybody is kind of facing this now, whether they know it or not. But I love the human spin you put on that, because that's something that always really strikes me as something that gets missed is, you can put all the controls in place and say, well, you can't do this and this and this because that's risky. But at the end of the day, you're still dealing with humans, and they'll do exactly like what you said. They're just going to go and run Claude or whatever on a different computer, copy the work over, do it there and move it back because they have things to do, and they're probably getting pushed harder. And let's assume that the CEO is almost for sure telling them they need to use AI and move faster and be more efficient and all of that. So it really gets to like thinking about what's the workflow design for employees, and how do you enable that when it comes to security? Is that is there anything you do when it comes to, kind of guiding your team again to, like, how do you help them understand what problems people are trying to solve and how they can do that sort of secure by default, maybe being sort of the way to think about that?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely part of it. I also think about it kind of, there's lots of ways to visualize this, but one way is like concentric rings. And so like in the inner ring is, our more sensitive data that we hold on behalf of customers. It's our core production servers in the cloud, or services in the cloud that we run. It's kind of the centralized operational side of things. And in that area, we have to take less risk, right? We have to have more controls to be able to do things. And then maybe the next ring out is how developers are building. And if we've got good guardrails between the developer endpoints and the cloud, whether it's GitHub or CI/CD, all those kind of things, and we have things like branch protection in place, and we've got code scanning in place, and a variety of things like that, then you have some controls with some flexibility too. And I think in the outer ring, there could be a little bit more flexibility of like, hey, we can try out some tools. We can maybe try multiple, AI chat programs. We can try multiple design programs, but we're going to keep them away from customer data or away from kind of sales data for a little bit until we've solidified which one we're going to go with. And then we'll go do the due diligence, get the enterprise account, do all that kind of stuff. And so I think it's not a one size fits all, and it can't be, because we're moving too fast and the space is moving too fast.
Yeah. It does require sort of a different mindset and just a shift in how you think about the problem from, where as a practice, security folks have been maybe in the last 10 years. And this is something that's just come very quickly in the last 18 or 24 months with all of this. I'm curious, like, when it comes, because I think your point is true, right? That like startups are doing a lot of the innovation just because they can, because if you're starting from ground zero, you can build very differently than if you have 10 years of product and features and stuff you have to kind of work around. Like, how do you work with vendors when it comes to, like, say somebody's really solving a problem well for you, but just because we know, it's a 6-person shop and probably they're not going to have the most mature things in place. I mean, do you have requirements? Do you partner with them more closely on getting them to where you need them to be? Or how do you think about that more generally when you talk about third parties you're bringing in?
Yeah, I think when we do have a robust third-party risk program where we're digging in with each vendor, we're looking at the privacy side, but also kind of security control side. But then I think when it comes to the startups and the earlier stage folks, I think there's a lot of value in those partnerships. And whether it's AI or not, there's often, if you're trying to really solve a space that's not saturated with a lot of great solutions already, and there's a few of these still in security,
Yep.
that finding an early stage partner to come alongside where they're still building and they can still shift really quickly based on your feedback and vice versa, I think has a lot of value. And so then I think it comes down to, where do you take the risk, and how do you kind of firewall that risk off from some of the other parts of the business? And so that may look like, hey, we're going to run it with this set of data or this trial set of users until this set of, you've done this set of controls that we absolutely must have. And then we can scale it out from there. Or you've got mitigating controls, right? So it's like, maybe you don't have the traditional third-party risk checkbox controls we'd like to see, but we're going to add on more audit, or we're going to put more kind of telemetry in place around usage and other things that might be happening there. So I think there's a lot of ways to do it. It has to be done thoughtfully, but I think there's a lot of advantages when done well.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I mean, so this last weekend we had the Super Bowl, and watching that, I think every ad was either AI or about AI. There probably was one other thing, but it was basically AI everywhere. And I noticed, there's a lot of like kind of the next generation of no code, low code, which probably ties into what you were talking about, right? Of like, people are going to be using something like Claude Cowork to do a lot of their work in the future. And so maybe getting back to some of those concentric rings that you're talking about, I mean, how do you think about balancing all of this? Because, you have the idea that people can now build all their own tools, but, we've kind of seen this before also, where when people build their own tools, now you own a bunch of tools and that person leaves and all of that. How do you sort of think about that when it comes to not only the security side, but, with your IT hat on, all of that trade-off around like the sprawl of, if we all are building everything, now we own all of this, the ongoing maintenance, the total cost of ownership, like how do you roll that around in your head?
Yeah, I think I love it and I hate it all at the same time as like a technical,
so many possibilities.
There's so many, and like, I've always loved new tech, and as things evolve every year, I'm excited. I always read the full announcement of whatever, the new operating system for my phone every year. I'm like, oh, I want to know everything. I've always been that way. But on the security side, like you said, there's a lot of risk to that. So I think there's probably, I kind of categorize this in the two camps. One is like the low code, no code experimentation, what things like Figma or Lovable or Claude will even allow you to do a cursor really, really fast. And so like, 2 weekends ago, one of our folks jammed out a really quick kind of low code demo just through prompting of a vision of what we want to build this year on our product roadmap. And it was incredibly helpful because I'm a visual learner, to be able to see that and see how the product can interact, see how things we haven't even built yet. We don't have an infrastructure behind a couple of these features, but to envision how it would work to a user was really helpful. And that's not a thing we have to support. It was a one-time thing we can look at, we can admire, and he was able to do that in a few hours. On the other side, this is where I think we still don't have a good understanding of what's coming with sort of the citizen developer, every employee is an agent builder, because as these agents proliferate, like right now it's just prompts, right? Or sophisticated prompting and APIs. But at the same time, we're going to have to support all those at some point. Like if they become the core way a team works and the person who wrote it leaves, that's no different than that internal app that somebody wrote. And so I don't think we've wrapped our heads around all of this yet. I'm hoping there's going to be some good integration with things like GitHub in the future, where your prompt and your agent and the deployment's all tied together and it's nice and clean and you've got the history and the builds and all that. But if that exists, I haven't seen it yet.
That's going to be a ways in the future, just from guessing by what I'm seeing is, I mean, it seems like there's lots of individual platforms doing lots of different things, and then you do have where people can use, Cloud Code or whatever and just whip up a script that does something, and then they turns into a few scripts, and then it's a coordinating script, and then I'm sure it just kind of grows that way until it topples over under its own weight, which, yeah, I mean, I feel like some of us are going to have to relearn the whole lesson of the past, because there are things where it probably makes sense because it's your core business, but then others that less so. But I think your point on, like, for prototyping, like being able to segment that out of what you want to allow, and maybe this isn't going to be the thing we're going to drop in, but it helps people see what's possible and iterate on, and then now you can give that to people who can actually build it in a sort of scalable manner. So I mean, I think that's really important to call out, just that there's a lot of different ways to use these, and you can't look at them all the same as well. Yeah, so I'm curious from the, because at 1Password, you're doing a lot of credential management, how do you look at this in the future? Because when it comes to all of these agents, like, they're acting on behalf of the users. And I know you guys have like a fairly strong like CLI stuff, and you can do programmatic access and stuff. And I haven't actually seen anything that you are or aren't doing or planning, but I was kind of curious just how you think about this as a kind of problem space, because it is something where it seems like, I know people are talking about identity a lot, but to me, it's even less about identity and more like, do we have temporary credentials that agent X or whatever can use that is supposed to be used for this one task that I gave it to do? And is it like is it doing the right thing in the right context of what I'm doing? Like, how do you think about, kind of the future of this when it comes to allowing autonomous, whether it's scripts or agents or what have you, to do work and to do it securely? Because I don't think we have very many good answers right now.
No, there's definitely more questions than answers at the moment. I think even without looking too far in the future, if we just look at today, developers have sort of been on the forefront of this the last year. And I think we're just starting to realize this as security teams. And so from a 1Password perspective, we're looking at this closely because we've been in the developer workflow for a while with things like holding API keys and SSH keys and things like that. But then with now everybody running Claude and Cursor and other things on their endpoints, and trying to figure out how to give those agents and MCP servers the right credentials, the right things, and then making sure that those aren't just laying around on disk, because turns out a lot of those are just stored in plain text .env files.
That ends up being the scary part, is once you give it to them,
scary.
Maybe they'll be smart about it.
Yeah, and there's not a lot of tools to fix that. And so that's where we're investing now. I mean, we've got some capabilities that we've had for a while, like SSH key storage and vaults that's integrated with the CLI, but also things like developer environment kind of capabilities to store .env files in vaults and have them mounted in memory to be able to use by these agents and by developer environments. But if you kind of fast forward talking about the future, I think that's where we're going to have to head as an industry, and that's where, frankly, we're looking. And if you look at some of the blog posts we've been doing over the last few weeks, you'll kind of see that trend of tying the identity and the credentials and the intent together in a way that makes sense and is user-friendly. So it's not just a million prompts coming up or a million emails somebody has to go deal with and approve, because then at some point people are just going to click yes. But doing that in a way that makes sense, has scope to what the agent's intended to do, I think is where we're going to have to go. And so that's going to be a combination of the endpoint. It's going to be a combination of sort of cloud credentialing, credential brokering, and then combining that with kind of tracking the identities back to the human when there is a human on the other end.
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, I think like the intent and the context of, it's probably a chain of events that led to this credential being needed to do this action. Does that align with the original user's intent? Does the context of how this is being used make sense? Do you feel like that ends up being where we end up having to move to like ephemeral credentials that are generated on the fly for that given action and the intent? Or is that still a ways out before we get to where we can do that?
I think we're going to have to move there to a certain degree. I think the question is going to be how often and when do you involve a human to that? Because given the autonomous nature of these agents and sort of their tendency to do unexpected things, I think, if you're going to grant your agent access to your GitHub account, it's probably good to say like, hey, you can really only have access to this one repo for these reasons, and maybe only for the next day. But also if you take that too far, then it's just going to be notifications to somebody's phone, and that's all they're going to do. Is just
we see that blow up
on their phone.
Plenty of times, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I think some of this is going to be pre-scoped intent that we give the agents as we're building them and launching them. And the others, I think there are going to be very specific points we want a human to say yes to it. And then finding that balance and the user experience around that's going to be really critical.
Yeah, because otherwise it's, we saw like Twitter got hacked because they just bombed someone with MFA alerts until they finally got sick of it and just hit yes, which sounds crazy to me, but apparently that's a thing that happens. And on the other end, if you're running YOLO mode all the time, it's just a matter of time before something bad happens. When it comes to that, just as a CISO, when you're looking at kind of putting controls in place, you've got, again, business objectives are in place. You've thought through the risk. If you have to think of what are the minimum viable controls you want for having autonomous systems that can take actions in production, what are the things that come to top of mind for you in that space?
Yeah, minimum viable controls. All the things I can think of, sadly, many aren't available today for us to do.
I think that's the reality.
Based finally scope credentials would be great, but those are things that, there might be some capabilities out there, but they're not translating to agents in a meaningful way yet. I think today the basics have got to be the basics that have been there for a long time of least privileged, understanding where your really high risk assets are and ensuring that there's sort of more than one control in place to deal with that. And so I think that's the thing we've got to continue to do, is not take our eye off the ball from a security perspective. And those tried and true methods of least privilege, and kind of iterating the controls have to be there. As we move forward, though, I think we're going to get into some of the things we talked about of being able to do more ephemeral scoping of access, being able to do things like binding identity to agents in a way that is clear on how it got there, who generated it, who created it, what intent did, and other agents.
It's like a multi-tier identity at that point.
Yeah, exactly. And then auditability, how did that thing happen? And right now, that's one of the more concerning parts of some of the agent things we're seeing is you unleash a few of these agents and things happen, but often they're working on our behalf with our own identities. And so to a security team, it's difficult to know, did the person just do that or did their agent do it? And so I think we're going to have that fidelity too.
Yeah. And I think because they're often working across multiple systems, you need some equivalent of distributed tracing with these multi-tiered identities of agent X did this on behalf of user Y across these four, being able to watch the timeline, I think ends up being interesting, which is probably also difficult if it's doing multiple handoffs and things. But yeah, lots of interesting things for future teams to be building in the security space. I think
there's some really interesting data and privacy challenges here too that I don't think we've quite wrapped our heads around. I'll give you an example. I was experimenting with an agent a couple weeks ago, and it was a simple one. It basically builds out my meeting schedule for the day and gives me a daily briefing on all my meetings, but it goes to my calendar, it goes into Google, it might search internal company data to get context, and if it can't find something, it'll go out to the web. And so it builds out here's who you're meeting with, here's why, here's the content, here's some relevant documents, super helpful. And I'm thinking, gosh, it would be helpful if some of my team could see this, so it's not just me. But then I'm like, well, gosh, can I just blast that out in Slack to everybody? Because what if I have a sensitive meeting? What if I have an HR topic to talk about? I don't want all that context being shared out with a large group of people. And so being able to scope these and understand if it's happening on my behalf and posting into Slack, being able to say, but this is going to a broader audience, please redact certain things. These are the non-deterministic areas that I think privacy and data are going to have a strong kind of role in as we go forward too.
Yeah. And then you have the sort of more nefarious bits where whenever I think of a calendar thing like this, I'm could send you some sort of malicious calendar invite with some, white text on white background that posts out to wherever. Yeah. This gets to, I think what we're talking about there, right? The value is just so high that you can't tell people they can't do this because that might save someone a half hour every morning. And, so how do you meet them where they're at? When it comes to that, how do you think about that again when we talk about enabling developers and developer flow? Because there's the stuff like Cloud Code and Codex or whatever people are using, Cursor. Obviously, if you're a software company, you're building software, having your developers suddenly have triple the output is huge. And it's really, you can't ignore the business value of that. But then, all of the potential downsides of one bad plugin and the thing has full read write on their machine. How do you get to where's the line? Okay, we need to enable developers, but hey, this is crazy. You can't do that. And we need to start enforcing things. mean, how do you sort of think about that?
Yeah, I think I've been thinking about this for a while because I had the good fortune of being at GitHub as Copilot was being
Yeah,
developed and
exactly.
delivered there. So we got to use it early on. I think largely this is where some of the SDLC controls become incredibly important still. So like teams that haven't quite done things like branch protection and blocking reviews and strong CI/CD checks before going to production, I think now's the time. Like, don't unleash the agents until you have at least some of those in place. But at the same time, you've now got kind of what you were talking about is now we have local agents in MCP that we didn't quite have before. Now we have skills added to the mix as well, which are even less structured and can be scary. And so I think there's got to be some guardrails. And so some of the things we're exploring is making the bar low. So letting people get what they need, but still getting approval. So, hey, don't just install any MCP or any skill you want. We're going to do a quick check. We're going to make sure that we're looking at this the right way before you can just start doing that. And so, the imminent example recently is, of course, OpenClaw and ClaudeBot.
Yep.
Of something that's not a thing that we want anybody experimenting with on their work computer because it's just too unfettered and
that would be insane,
not controllable enough, right? But so there's lines to that, but we also don't want to make it so restrictive folks feel like they have to go rogue and do their own stuff. And so I think it's striking a balance there.
And I'm just curious, because it's like I agree, but at the same time, then it gets to as you start scaling the org and the operations, like looking over everybody's MCP server suddenly isn't really, it's not feasible necessarily. I mean, it feels like we're going to end up where, you're going to take all the learnings from this and build that into more AI that's going to kind of do what your team is doing right now, which, of course, still has some of the same problems, but it's like we need to kind of keep stacking turtles on top of each other until they're stacked high enough that we feel pretty good about the situation. Is that sort of where you see things going?
I think that's part of it. I also have a suspicion that old's going to come new again, and that we're going to see capabilities like privileged access management and IGA and just-in-time provisioning be.
I'm sure they'll have new acronyms though.
Yeah, I hope we don't. Maybe we can not. We'll just put AI in front of everything, and so same acronyms just with AI now.
I can't learn anymore. Before we go on with the discussion, I want to share something with you that I've been building for the last 9 months to solve the problem of awful security questionnaires. They're, of course, necessary for the sales process to communicate your security posture, but it's not really high leverage work. So we built TrustMind because we want people to get back to doing what matters, securing their platforms, or shoveling snow. Really, anything besides copy-pasting answers about your firewalls and antivirus signatures for the 33rd time. TrustMind is dead simple. Just upload a questionnaire in any format or point it at a web portal, and it comes back completed in minutes. Done. Ready to submit, but without the joys of 72 new questions appearing in a portal right before you're supposed to leave for dinner, just because you answered yes to a question that asked, do you use software? TrustMind is packed with advanced features like automated conflict detection, audit trails, adjustable tone, there's a voice mode, and even a customizable self-service portal for your customers to use, complete with a chat interface. TrustMind is built by and for practitioners from people who care about the user experience and who have done hundreds of these for the world's largest companies. We want to save everyone from the pain and agony of having to explain for the 3rd time this month why you don't have tape backups that need to be moved off-site. With TrustMind, everyone gets free and unlimited Word and Excel questionnaire automation, plus a free portal every month, forever. No trial, no credit card, just pain-free living. If this resonates with you or someone you know, head to trustmind.com and sign up for a free account now. All right, let's get back to the show.
I know. It's that's probably why I really use ChatGPT the most for is I just heard a new acronym. What is it? Somebody help me. But yeah, so I think we're going to see some of those come back as well, because there's really a lot of plumbing in those capabilities and solutions that have been around for a while that can be applicable. They're not there yet, but I think there's a lot of value in that. So I think it'll be a combination of AI helping and then also, taking some of those kind of tried and true methods and applying.
And then, I think one of the other things ends up being, again, because everybody's building with AI, and it sort of just changes how we're building software now. And because you're at GitHub, I assume you have quite a lot of insight into this space, but thinking about software supply chain, and not from, your own vendors, but from the pieces that your developers or, if it's end users just kind of building stuff now, all the different libraries that get pulled in. I mean, how do you see teams and companies even being able to manage that? Because now it's not just like a developer problem, that you can necessarily do in CI. Because like we were saying, people might just have scripts on their computer and things like that. How do you think about that as a problem? Because it seems like one more we don't really have a great answer for as an industry.
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple elements here. One is I'm actually optimistic in this kind of vulnerability management and patching and libraries has just been such a mess, and everybody kind of went to let's patch really quick. And then you have the vulnerabilities from last year that came out where if you patch it too quick and it has a backdoor in it, then really bad things happen. So don't patch so quick. But I think this is actually where AI can help us quite a bit from a scaling perspective. And so I get the opportunity for kind of the day job, and then also some work I do on the side, helping out some VCs to meet with a lot of startup companies. And some of the ones I've seen are using kind of these agent swarms, even though they probably didn't call it that 2 months ago, to move at a bigger scale than I've ever seen, trying to address this set of vulnerabilities. And so I think from whether that's patching and getting kind of golden images in a better state, or being able to really inspect what you have in your environment, tailored to what you need, tailored to what your risks are, I think we're going to see a lot of opportunity in that space. Now, there's likely a period of time before that gets mature where it's going to be a little scary, where, we saw, was it last week, the new Claude model was able to find all those 0 days and like well-researched, well-secured packages. So I think we're going to see a little bit of push and pull here, but ultimately I think the defenders are going to come out in the better spot because they have the context. And I think that context from inside of a company, whether it's your policies, previous bug bounty decisions, previous decisions your engineering team has made, using all that to help inform how the agents are looking for and addressing issues, I think ultimately the defenders are going to come out ahead here.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think it's just a matter of building, like we just have a lot of stuff to build because it's taking all of that. How do you get the right context to the right agent at the right time? And that's the challenge. And it's just something every company has to figure out how to do internally, and how do you want to start building that harness? Because I think it really will end up being sort of fairly unique to each company. So, but at the end of the day, you do end up with, it comes down to context as to how well you can do as an attacker and a defender, and you just have way more as a defender. So totally agree there.
Yeah.
And so, I think one of the things ends up being like you can patch a lot faster when you have all these agents. Like you said, if you had a bunch of dependencies that are out of date, like previously, no one wanted to touch that because you're now just like fixing a bunch of broken things that can now be handed off, I think, fairly easily. So then, if we think about upstream and like building more securely, how do you see this working out for, secure by design? I'll assume that that's a big sort of first-class citizen at 1Password more than most places, just due to the nature of the product. I mean, are there things that you do that you think other companies aren't doing that they should start thinking of, because, they're freeing up some of this space that would have been used on patching all these other things that can be now used to, shift to the proverbial left?
Yeah. I really love the secure by design philosophy, generally that the folks at CISO and all the companies that signed on to that pushed over the last few years. I think one of the things I love about it is the kind of the call to action for all of us to think about those things more. And I think that's going to be really important, more so. I mean, it was always important, right? Like putting the user first, making sure that the secure things, the easy things, the default thing, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I'm seeing more companies do that, which is great. I think when we are considering agents using our products on behalf of users, it opens up a whole like additional realm of possibilities of good and bad behavior, right? So it's like secure by design often was thought about of like, all right, make sure audit logs are available, make sure, passkeys are the default. Like you can kind of go down the list, and those are great. But if agents are the number one thing driving our products, or expected to interact with them in some way, how do you make it so it works well but is still safe? And so we've been talking about this a ton and thinking about it a lot. One of the things we're sort of starting on as a first principle here is something that's been a first principle for us for a long time, which is give the users the choice of their risk level to a certain degree. Because some users are going to want to be like highly risky. Maybe they've used 1Password, they've created another vault that's just for high risk AI things, and they're cool with it. That's great. Other users are maybe going to be a little more conservative, or they're using it for all their kind of personal stuff in one vault. And so trying to give the users not only the guidance and information to make the right decision, but the choices. Like, hey, you can turn this on or off. If you turn this off, it's probably going to make the user experience a little less good, but it keeps you safe from this class of, prompt injection or whatever. And so I think that's a first principle for us today. And then I think as we go forward, it's investing the research into the space and understanding what are the risks and how do we help keep our users safe so that they don't have to be experts in every brand new technology and attack vector that's out there, and that they can just use our products and understand that we've got them covered.
Yeah, and I think that's really what it comes down to. I'm wondering if it ends up being that, and it's just always seems to be like the answer is more AI, because I think one of the problems with secure by design in the past was like who had time to do threat modeling and the expertise to spread that across all of engineering. But now with AI, I mean, I know there's companies that are doing this, but even you could probably write your own whatever that's part of just looking at PRDs and building design specs. And that does it up front, which if that covers 80% of what was or what should be happening, and we were doing close to nothing before, I mean, I think that's already a big win. Are there things that you would tell people that are at companies where, again, maybe it's kind of less the directive from on high that like you need to be secure by design? Because for 1Password, I'll assume if you guys screw up and passwords leak everywhere, kind of not good for business, very clearly. Where other companies maybe don't have that kind of giant hammer to put behind, you can't screw up security. Are there things that you think can be used to push that same mindset and ethos more broadly now that some of this is more accessible?
Yeah, I totally think so. I think it's the incentives are going to be there as well, because the downsides are higher now because of I think the number how users are using applications and kind of the various things that we're all buying and using every day, but also now with agents in the mix, they're going to find the soft spots a lot faster and maybe exploit things that we didn't know about before. And so I think, for anyone out there thinking about these things, I think the secure by design model is to a certain degree going to become table stakes to be able to ship things that users are going to trust and our agents can use on our behalves. I think that's one part of it. I think the other part is if we're like, I think you touched on this earlier, if we're able to free up some resources, then can those resources focus on this? And so I think about like design and product work and some of the things like that, right? Like, so with capabilities like the new Figma or V0 from Vercel or Lovable, like ideally we can get these prototypes out faster. And then I would love to see more design go into like, how is it used by the users or the agents in a more secure way? And like, how is that experience? And is the default thing the secure thing and vice versa? And so I think it's a great example of like reinvesting in really important, valuable work when our time is freed up from other things.
Yeah, and I think this gets to the like the compound engineering thing that the team at Every writes about a lot. Like as you're going through this, how do you kind of codify that into something so that it becomes repeatable and something you can almost make like an internal product out of. Yeah, I mean, there's so much interesting everything is changing in how we kind of build and run companies these days that I'm just constantly excited talking about all of this. I did have one question I wanted to ask you, and this is, as someone who's been using password managers for a long time and 1Password as well, how do you recommend people? Because I think for people that are running security teams, you have a password manager, you push it out, people are using it, but then I often find like some people just don't use it. Like, what do you guys do to encourage people to use them more? Because that's always been one of the painful sticking points for me is like, okay, well, we got you all licenses and it's great. And, it should make everything easier for them, but somehow people still just don't kind of push over and use it. Do you guys have any tricks and tips on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's one we talk about for sure. And I think, as with all things, there's kind of a graduated scale on how to do this and like what works and what doesn't work. I think some of it is, again, making it super easy for folks. So those who are using like MDM or the ability to push things out, just kind of get things out to users. And then we've been investing a bunch of money and time and energy internally to making the sign up process easier for enterprise customers. So like working with SSO and SCIM, for instance, because we are committed to sort of the zero knowledge approach. For a long time, we had folks that like you had to deploy something in your own infrastructure to be able to do the SCIM connections and be able to provision accounts and deprovision accounts. But using confidential computing and like AWS Nitro enclaves, we built something that kind of preserves that promise, but now we can do it on behalf. And so we're working internally to make those rollouts and the friction go down and be easier. But I think on the internal side, it's things like MDM, it's things like, being able to do things like, well, you can't have access to this set of apps unless you're getting it in 1Password. And so that's one of the things we're exploring as well, is being able to control some of those credentials so that they're really only available once you have 1Password set up. And so, being able to say like, all right, we have a shared social media account and we have it stored in 1Password. That's the only way to get to it. And so I think there's a lot of things like that start to unlock people saying like, oh, this is actually super user friendly and it's a good thing to do. And it helps with team transition and onboarding and offboarding and all those kind of things. And it kind of naturally gets there. As we look forward, I think developers are going to be another area where it's just going to be easier, and security teams are going to be incentivized to say like, hey, please store X, Y, and Z, these credentials, this SSH key, these tokens in 1Password. We're not going to issue them any other way.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it really does get to incentives and having it just be like the easiest path. Although that's been the most frustrating part for me, is like, this will make your life easier and better on every front. And then, some people are just like, well, yeah, but I have it stored in my browser. Just gets me every time. Well, like wrapping up, and I hate to stick you with predictions and things that you should be predicting, but especially because it's just so wide open what can happen in the next 12 months. But, are there things that you think are moving, most quickly that would be a blind spot for security teams that people should be thinking about in 2026? I mean, I think like the CloudBot Multbook thing is probably one that snuck up on everybody. But what do you see as sort of kind of the big thing to keep your eye on for 2026?
I mean, I think that's definitely one of them. I think it goes back to some of the things we were talking about earlier too, of credentials for all these agents running with developers and how developers are using them, right? Like we've kind of shifted over the last few years, we shifted our focus, many security teams had, to the cloud infrastructure and what was happening on GitHub and what was happening in deployment scenarios and production. But now with AI and all these API tokens and MCP servers, we've put a whole lot of credentials back on the endpoints, and they need to be there to be able to get things done. But like, how do we manage those in a reasonable way? And then how do we ensure that we have visibility into them? How do we revoke and all those kind of things? And so I think that's something we're hearing more of from folks when we talk to customers and partners and peers, of like, hey, this is a bit bigger than it used to be. So I think that's one of them. And then I think how we're all going to wrap our heads around agent swarms and sort of this delegated identity or intent-driven identity is going to be another big one we're going to be talking about all year.
Yep, no, totally agree. I mean, I think the idea of storing credentials, plain text in files in a known directory on everybody's computer should be terrifying to everyone. And then, yeah, like the scale of swarms. I just started using Claude Teams this week, and it's nuts where, it can spin up 6 agents that work in parallel and they coordinate with each other. And then you can one-shot a crazy amount of work. I mean, it's way too enticing and easy. I mean, everyone's going to be wanting to do this when they get their hands on it. So yeah, absolutely agree on both fronts with you.
It's going to be a really interesting year. And it seems like it keeps speeding up too. So it's one of those things, like from a security team perspective, we talk about this a lot internally, of the pace we need to learn and grow with the technology is increasing every month. Like it's no longer a nice to have. It's in order to be able to defend and keep the promises we've committed to our customers, we actually have to move faster, learn faster, integrate technology faster. The year-long procurement cycle isn't going to work in some cases as it did before, unless we have partners who are also integrating the latest tech at the same time. And so I think that's actually going to be an expectation of some vendor relationships moving forward is, hey, this whole space is going to go this fast. There's going to be a new model released every X number of months. Can you commit as part of the contract keeping up and helping us like go faster. And it's something we haven't had to think about a lot as buyers on the other side of the table much, but I think it's going to be true going forward.
Yeah, and I think this ends up being something where security folks, we're always, I want my seat at the table, imaginary table that all these other important people are sitting at. I mean, I think there's a real opportunity for both technical folks and then security in particular to kind of be a business enabler in a way that we haven't had access to in the past, because we just have so much more background and understanding of like the potential and how these things can be used. Like there's just so much where you can go and reach out to marketing or sales or whoever and help them rethink what's possible, help them, rethink how do we do this to enable people and get those security by design bits sort of integrated all in one. So, hopefully people are jumping on that opportunity because, we haven't had something like this in the past.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Well, thanks a ton for coming on. It's been really great talking to you, and thanks for sharing all your experience.
Likewise, this is super fun. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for listening to the TPRM podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to subscribe and share it with a colleague. You can find more insights and resources over at tprmpodcast.com. And until next time, remember, trust nothing, verify most things, and keep building. That's it for this episode of the TPRM podcast. I'm Nate Lee. Thanks for joining me and my guest today. If you found this conversation valuable, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app, leave us a review, and share the episode with your peers and colleagues. For more resources and insights on building business-aligned security programs and managing vendor security, visit tprmpodcast.com and connect with me on LinkedIn. We'll see you next time.